There are weak points in you that rivals notice before you do. They are not obvious flaws. They are traits you were praised for. If you are the man who keeps the peace, who senses tension and moves to dissolve it, who feels responsible for how others feel, you may already be broadcasting leverage. The danger is not aggression. It is predictability. The moment someone realizes you struggle to disappoint, that you equate boundaries with guilt, your limits stop being yours. They become negotiable, not through force but through expectation. There are specific psychological pressure points that get tracked quietly. The need to be seen as good, the discomfort with conflict, the instinct to over-explain. Once these patterns are identified, control does not require confrontation. It requires patience. The world is kind to certain men, not loudly kind, not dramatically kind, just consistently approving. They are the ones who listen without interrupting, who sense discomfort before it is spoken, who smooth tension before it hardens into conflict. From an early age, these men learn that cooperation earns safety. Teachers praise them for being mature. Parents trust them to be responsible. Friends lean on them, sometimes without asking. Society labels them emotionally intelligent, evolved, good. And for a long time, it works. Agreeableness becomes an identity, a moral posture, a quiet proof that one belongs. These men are told, directly and indirectly, that their value lies in how easy they are to be around, how little friction they create, how reliably they absorb inconvenience so others do not have to. But something subtle happens when a trait is praised without limit. Kindness stops being a choice and becomes an expectation. Empathy shifts from strength to duty. Understanding turns into something owed. No one announces this shift. There is no moment of betrayal. It happens gradually, through raised eyebrows, disappointed silences, and the unspoken rule that saying no requires justification. The agreeable man learns that refusal feels like harm, that boundaries feel like aggression, that asserting himself carries a moral cost, and so he adapts. He explains himself too much. He anticipates needs that were never asked of him. He compromises preemptively, hoping harmony will be preserved. Not because he is weak, but because he was taught that harmony equals safety. That disruption risks rejection. That being good means being accommodating. This is where the tension begins. Because power does not always arrive as domination. Often it arrives as reliance, as moral leverage, as the quiet realization that someone else now depends on your inability to disappoint them. Modern systems understand this. So do certain relationships. So do environments that reward compliance while calling it virtue. They do not break agreeable men. They simply remove the conditions under which agreeableness remains voluntary. The man who cannot disappoint without guilt becomes predictable. The man who equates self-assertion with selfishness becomes manageable. His limits are no longer his own. They are negotiated externally, one concession at a time. This documentary is not an accusation. It is an examination. Agreeable men are not naive. They are not inferior. They are often perceptive, emotionally attuned, and deeply human. But when a man learns that his worth is measured by how little resistance he offers, something dangerous becomes possible. Because the moment a man cannot say no without guilt, someone else gets to decide where he ends. Trap 1. Moral leverage. Moral leverage is rarely loud. It does not threaten. It does not command. It does not need to raise its voice. In fact, it often sounds like praise. Agreeable men are guided less by reward and more by internal ethics. They want to act correctly even when no one is watching. They value fairness, responsibility, and care. This is not social conditioning alone. It is identity. Being a good man is not something they perform. It is something they believe they are. That belief makes them predictable. When someone frames a request as moral, negotiation disappears. There is no discussion of cost, capacity, or consent. There is only implication, a suggestion that the request is not optional, because refusing it would reveal something flawed in your character. The language is subtle. If you really cared, you would help. A good man wouldn't walk away from this. This is just the right thing to do. None of these statements issue an order. They do something more effective. They attach compliance to identity. Historically, this has always worked best on the conscientious. Moral framing has been used to extract labor, loyalty, sacrifice, and silence from those most invested in being seen as virtuous, not through force but through conscience. The individual is not compelled by fear of punishment, but by fear of moral failure. In modern life, the setting has changed, but the mechanism has not. In workplaces, agreeable men are asked to stay late because they are team players, to absorb extra responsibility because they are reliable, to tolerate imbalance because they understand the bigger picture. The appeal is never to contract or compensation. It is to character. In relationships, the same logic appears. Emotional availability becomes proof of love. Constant understanding becomes evidence of maturity. Any resistance is reframed as selfishness, avoidance, or lack of care. The agreeable man begins to associate boundaries with harm. This is not cruelty. It is not manipulation in the dramatic sense. It is virtue turned into leverage. When morality is used this way, it does not corrupt the unethical. It targets the ethical. The more deeply a man identifies with being good, the easier it is to bypass his consent by appealing to that goodness. And this is the danger. Because once morality becomes a pressure tool, the most principled people are no longer protected by their values. They are exposed by them. Trap 2. Guilt as currency. Guilt rarely arrives as accusation. It arrives as a feeling, a tightening in the chest, a quiet sense that something is wrong, even when nothing has been said aloud. For agreeable men, this feeling becomes familiar early. They are attuned to emotional shifts. They notice disappointment before it is expressed. They sense withdrawal before conflict forms. Over time, they begin to associate emotional discomfort in others with personal responsibility. This is where guilt becomes currency. It functions as an invisible transaction. Someone feels let down. Someone else pays. Not with money or effort alone, but with self-erasure. With time, energy, and emotional labor that was never formally agreed upon. The power of guilt lies in how little explanation it requires. It does not argue whether a request is fair. It does not examine capacity or cost. It asks a simpler, more destabilizing question: if you refuse, will someone be hurt? For agreeable men, that question is often enough. In families, guilt appears as obligation disguised as loyalty. After everything we've done for you. This is just how family works. Saying no feels like betrayal, not choice. The past is quietly used as leverage in the present. And the agreeable man learns that independence carries a moral price. In relationships, guilt takes on a softer tone but a sharper edge. Emotional availability becomes a standing requirement. Boundaries are interpreted as distance. Exhaustion is reframed as neglect. The agreeable man begins to manage not just his actions, but the emotional reactions of others. He complies not because he agrees, but because he wants the discomfort to stop. Socially, the pattern repeats. Invitations cannot be declined without explanation. Absence requires apology. Choosing oneself feels indulgent. Guilt fills the space where consent should be. Over time, this creates conditioning. The agreeable man learns to comply preemptively, to anticipate disappointment and neutralize it before it arises. He gives earlier, stays longer, absorbs more, not because the demands increase, but because the cost of refusal feels unbearable. The emotional toll becomes normalized. Resentment has no outlet, so it sinks inward. It does not explode. It calcifies. This is the most dangerous part. Guilt is most effective when it feels self-generated. When the man believes the pressure is coming from his own conscience, not from someone else's expectations, the mechanism disappears. Only the obligation remains. And once guilt becomes internal, compliance no longer needs to be requested. Trap 3. Conflict aversion conditioning. Conflict is not what agreeable men fear most. What they fear is what conflict might cost them. For many, disagreement became associated early with withdrawal, tension, or emotional distance. Raised voices, cold silences, the feeling that connection could be lost in an instant. So they adapted. They learned to soften their opinions, to delay objections, to phrase discomfort as confusion rather than refusal. Peace became the priority, even when it required self-erasure. This is conflict aversion conditioning. It is not cowardice, it is training. A learned belief that harmony equals safety, and that asserting oneself risks abandonment. Over time, the agreeable man stops seeing conflict as communication and begins to see it as threat. But conflict is not inherently aggressive. It is informational. It reveals misalignment. It clarifies limits. It forces negotiation. Without it, boundaries remain invisible. When conflict is avoided, something subtle happens. Demands increase, not because others are malicious, but because resistance never appears. Silence is interpreted as agreement. Compliance is assumed to be capacity. The absence of objection becomes permission. Others do not learn where the line is, because the line is never shown. Historically, groups that avoided confrontation were rarely left alone. They were managed. Their passivity was interpreted as consent, their silence as stability. Power did not disappear in these environments. It simply concentrated elsewhere, in those willing to press without pushback. The same dynamic plays out on a smaller scale in daily life. In workplaces, agreeable men tolerate unclear roles, shifting expectations, and unspoken overload. They absorb tasks that were never assigned because pushing back feels disruptive. Over time, they become indispensable and invisible at the same time, relied upon but rarely negotiated with. In relationships, conflict avoidance creates emotional asymmetry. One side expresses needs freely. The other edits theirs into silence. Resentment accumulates but remains unspoken. The relationship appears calm, even as it becomes unbalanced. The tragedy is not that agreeable men lose arguments. It is that they remove themselves from the arena where terms are set. When conflict disappears, power does not. It relocates. It moves to the side that is willing to risk discomfort, to tolerate tension, to assert reality even when it disrupts peace. And once power has relocated, reclaiming it requires something conflict-averse men were never taught to practice: the courage to be momentarily disliked in order to remain intact. Trap 4. Emotional labor exploitation. There is a certain kind of man people go to when things fall apart. He listens without interrupting. He remembers details others forget. He stays calm when emotions spike. In groups, he mediates. In relationships, he reassures. In families, he absorbs tension so others can stay functional. Over time, this becomes more than something he does. It becomes what he is for. This is where emotional labor exploitation begins. At first, it feels like trust. People open up because he is safe. They lean on him because he is steady. He becomes the container for frustration, anxiety, uncertainty. None of this is framed as demand. It is framed as connection, as closeness, as care. But slowly, availability turns into assignment. The agreeable man is expected to regulate the emotional climate, to de-escalate conflicts he did not create, to soothe reactions he did not cause, to remain composed no matter how much weight is placed on him. His calm is treated as infinite, his listening as automatic. What makes this exploitation difficult to see is that it does not look like taking. It looks like relying, and reliance feels flattering until it becomes one-sided. In friendships, he becomes the emotional anchor, the one others vent to but rarely check on. His role is to understand, not to be understood. When he finally expresses strain, it is often met with surprise, as if stability meant immunity. In romantic relationships, emotional availability becomes a standing expectation. He is asked to hold space, to validate, to remain patient. These are not unreasonable requests. The imbalance emerges when his own emotional needs are deferred indefinitely, when his exhaustion is interpreted as withdrawal, when his silence is seen as strength rather than depletion. The agreeable man learns to manage others while postponing himself. Over time, this creates a quiet fracture. Emotional labor, when unacknowledged, becomes invisible work. There is no reciprocity because the labor itself is mistaken for personality. He is not seen as giving. He is seen as being, and that is the danger. When empathy is chosen, it is a virtue. When it is expected, it becomes obligation. And when obligation replaces choice, even the most genuine care begins to feel like extraction. The question this raises is unsettling. If empathy is no longer voluntary, is it still compassion? Or has it become a role no one remembers assigning? Trap 5. The reciprocity illusion. Many agreeable men live by an unspoken rule. If I am fair, others will be fair. If I give, it will come back. If I show up consistently, it will be remembered. This belief is rarely articulated, but it shapes behavior deeply. Generosity is offered without calculation. Effort is extended without immediate return. The assumption is simple: balance will emerge on its own. This is the reciprocity illusion. In theory, reciprocity is a social principle. People respond to kindness with kindness. Cooperation invites cooperation. But in practice, reciprocity is not automatic. It is contextual. It depends on awareness, incentives, and memory. Agreeable men often give without tracking, while others track differently or not at all. The problem is not generosity. It is consistency without structure. When a man gives reliably, his behavior stops registering as a gift. It becomes the baseline. What was once appreciated becomes expected. The act no longer earns gratitude because it no longer feels optional. It feels normal. This is how kindness quietly devalues itself. In workplaces, the agreeable man who always helps becomes the default solution. Extra tasks land on his desk because they always have. No one consciously exploits him. They simply adjust their expectations to his availability. When he finally pulls back, the response is confusion, not gratitude. The absence is noticed more than the years of presence. In relationships, the same pattern appears. Emotional effort, time, and compromise are offered freely. There is no ledger, no reminder. Over time, the giving side fades into the background. The moment he asks for balance, it feels abrupt, out of character. The request itself is treated as imbalance. The illusion persists because agreeable men equate giving with integrity. They believe that keeping score corrupts sincerity, that asking for reciprocity cheapens the gesture. So they continue giving, hoping the equation will eventually correct itself. It rarely does. Systems and individuals adapt quickly to consistent input. They recalibrate around it. Reciprocity does not increase. Expectations do. The sobering insight is this: reciprocity is not a law of nature. It is a structure. It emerges when contributions are visible, bounded, and mutual. When generosity is endless and unmarked, it stops being recognized as generosity at all. And once that happens, pulling back feels like betrayal, even though nothing was ever promised in the first place. Trap 6. Authority framed as responsibility. Responsibility often arrives disguised as trust. Agreeable men are told they are reliable, that they can handle things, that things would fall apart without them. These statements sound like recognition. They feel like respect, but they often precede something else entirely. A transfer. Because responsibility is easier to give than authority, agreeable men are conscientious. They notice what needs to be done. They feel discomfort when systems falter or people struggle. This makes them ideal carriers of weight. Not because they are strongest, but because they are least likely to refuse. In workplaces, this pattern is almost invisible. The agreeable man is asked to coordinate, to cover gaps, to manage outcomes he does not control. He is accountable for results, but excluded from decisions. When things go well, the system functions. When things fail, he is asked why he did not do more. Authority remains concentrated above him. Responsibility flows downward. In families, the dynamic is quieter but no less potent. The agreeable son, partner, or sibling becomes the stabilizer. He mediates disputes. He absorbs stress. He adjusts his life to accommodate others' dysfunction. His reliability becomes the reason boundaries are never restructured. Why change when someone is already holding everything together? This is not accidental. Systems naturally distribute pressure toward those who can bear it without complaint. Power does not assign weight where resistance is strongest. It assigns it where friction is lowest. History reflects this pattern repeatedly. Large structures survive by offloading risk and accountability onto those without leverage. Titles and authority move upward. Responsibility moves down. Those who question the arrangement are labeled disruptive. Those who comply are praised as dependable. The agreeable man internalizes this praise. He confuses burden with value. He mistakes endurance for respect. But there is a quiet cost. Responsibility without authority creates exposure. You are answerable for outcomes you cannot shape. You are blamed for failures you could not prevent. Over time, this erodes agency and clarity. You are always on the hook, never at the helm. This is the unsettling truth. Responsibility without authority is not honor. It is vulnerability. And when a man carries weight without control, he is not being trusted. He is being positioned, not to lead, but to absorb the consequences when leadership fails. Trap 7. Identity lock-in. At some point, agreeableness stops being something a man does and becomes something he is. He is described as the good one, the patient one, the reasonable one. These labels sound affirming. They feel like recognition. Over time, they solidify into identity, and identity carries expectations. This is identity lock-in. Once a man is known for being understanding, his understanding is no longer noticed. It is assumed. Patience becomes his baseline. Calm becomes his obligation. The very traits that earned him approval become the standard he is measured against. Stepping outside that role rarely goes unnoticed. When the agreeable man asserts himself, the reaction is not curiosity. It is surprise, confusion, subtle disappointment. This isn't like you. What's gotten into you? The message is clear without being spoken. Consistency is rewarded. Deviation is suspect. What makes identity lock-in so effective is that it does not require enforcement. The man polices himself. He feels pressure to remain aligned with the version of him others have learned to rely on. To act differently risks losing not just approval, but coherence. He worries about being misunderstood, about destabilizing relationships built on predictability. Identity becomes a behavioral cage. This approval is conditional, though it rarely feels that way at first. As long as the man remains agreeable, he is valued. The moment he introduces friction, the warmth cools, the trust feels thinner, the praise disappears. He is not punished overtly. He is simply met with distance. The illusion is that identity equals acceptance. In reality, identity-based approval is transactional. It lasts only as long as behavior remains consistent. The moment a man grows, adapts, or resists, the identity that once protected him becomes a constraint. This is why identity is such an efficient form of control. It feels like affirmation. It feels like being seen. But it quietly narrows the range of acceptable behavior. It turns character into a script and punishes improvisation. The tension deepens here, because when a man believes he must remain agreeable to remain valued, control no longer needs to be applied from the outside. It operates from within. He maintains the role voluntarily, even as it limits him. And the most effective cages are the ones lined with praise. Trap 9. Self-blame, internalization. The final trap does not come from other people. It comes from inside. After enough cycles of overgiving, compliance, and quiet resentment, many agreeable men reach a familiar conclusion. Not that the situation was unfair, not that the structure was imbalanced, but that they themselves failed in some subtle way. They tell themselves they were not firm enough, not patient enough, not clear enough, not understanding enough. This is self-blame internalization. Instead of questioning the pattern, the agreeable man questions his character. He reviews interactions looking for where he could have been better, softer, more accommodating. He assumes responsibility not just for outcomes, but for dynamics he never designed. This feels like accountability. It sounds mature, it looks reflective, but it quietly resets the cycle. Self-blame replaces clarity. Instead of recognizing that boundaries were crossed, he concludes that he should have anticipated the crossing. Instead of noticing how pressure was applied, he focuses on how he reacted to it. The external system disappears from view. Only his internal shortcomings remain. This is where all the previous traps converge. Moral leverage taught him that refusing is a character flaw. Guilt trained him to associate boundaries with harm. Conflict aversion conditioned him to see discomfort as danger. Emotional labor exploitation normalized depletion. The reciprocity illusion convinced him that giving would balance itself. Responsibility without authority burdened him with outcomes he could not control. Identity lock-in punished deviation. Now, when the strain becomes unbearable, He does not ask what is wrong with the structure. He asks what is wrong with him. This internal discipline is far more efficient than external control. No one needs to pressure him anymore. He pressures himself. He adjusts his behavior preemptively. He tries harder next time. He becomes more careful, more considerate, more agreeable. The system remains untouched. The tone of self-blame is often gentle, even virtuous. I just need to communicate better. I should be more understanding. Maybe I overreacted. These thoughts feel responsible, but they quietly erase one critical question. Was this fair in the first place? This section is not about condemnation. It is about recognition, because self-blame is not insight when it consistently points in only one direction. It is conditioning, and it serves a purpose. Self-blame is the last line of defense for systems, relationships and dynamics that do not want to be questioned. When pressure becomes internal, resistance never has to appear. And once a man learns to turn every imbalance inward, the trap no longer needs to close. It is already locked. The answer is not to become colder. It is not to harden, dominate, or withdraw into indifference. Agreeableness is not the enemy. Empathy is not a flaw. The world does not need fewer men who care. What it needs are men who can choose when to care. Throughout this documentary, the traps were never about kindness itself. They were about the removal of choice, about generosity that became expectation, morality that became pressure, empathy that turned into obligation. Again and again, the same pattern appeared. A strength was praised, then quietly exploited, then normalized until the man forgot it had ever been voluntary. This is where power quietly eroded. Strength is not the absence of empathy. It is the presence of agency. Kindness only has meaning when it can be withheld. Cooperation only functions when refusal is possible. Without that, there is no generosity, only compliance. Reclaiming agreeableness does not mean becoming less human. It means becoming more intentional. It means recognizing that boundaries do not cancel care. They define it. A boundary is not an attack. It is information. It tells the world where cooperation ends and self-respect begins. The agreeable man does not need to transform into someone unrecognizable. He does not need to abandon his values or suppress his sensitivity. What he needs is self-governance, the ability to pause, to assess, to decide rather than react. Power does not require cruelty. It requires clarity. When a man can say no without explanation, his yes becomes meaningful. When he can tolerate disappointment, his generosity remains clean. When he can withstand being misunderstood, his integrity stabilizes. This is the quiet reversal. Agreeable men do not lose power because they care. They lose power when care replaces boundaries, when empathy is offered automatically instead of deliberately, when harmony is preserved at the cost of self-erasure. The most effective systems never force this surrender. They encourage it. They reward it. They wrap it in praise and call it virtue. That is why these traps are so difficult to see. The most dangerous constraints are not built from malice. They are built from approval, from labels that feel affirming, from roles that feel safe, from identities that are rewarded only as long as they remain predictable. The way out is not loud. It is not aggressive. It is not performative. It is stillness. A moment where a man notices the pressure and does not move, where he allows discomfort to exist without rushing to resolve it, where he remembers that his values were never meant to be a leash, and in that stillness something returns. Choice. That is where agreeableness becomes strength again.